At the end of this story, you'll see how a single blank check exposed the truth about love, loyalty, and greed. He was a billionaire who could buy anything except trust. So one day he decided to test his girlfriend with a blank check. What she wrote on it changed his life forever. Nobody knew what would come of it. Not even Ethan Cole, the man who had built an empire from scratch. A man so powerful, magazines called him the man who could buy anything. He had seen it too many times. Women falling for his charm, pretending to love him, only to get close enough to reach for his bank account. His assistant, Marcus, used to joke that Ethan should start interviewing his dates like job applicants. Maybe that's why when Sophie Miller walked into his company one morning, something inside him shifted. She wasn't like the others. She came for the role of a secretary. Her resume was clean, not flashy. Her clothes were plain, her makeup light, and her smile, well, it was the kind that felt genuine. Ethan didn't know that Sophie came from money too, a lot of it. Her father, Richard Miller, was one of America's most respected real estate moguls. But Sophie didn't want to live in her father's shadow. She wanted to understand life outside the bubble, what it meant to earn something. So, she applied to Cole Industries without using her last name, just to see what it felt like to be on the other side. When Ethan walked into the interview room, he didn't see a rich girl pretending to be simple. He saw a calm, grounded woman who looked him straight in the eye, not intimidated, not flirty, just real. He liked that. "Why do you want this job?" Ethan asked, scanning her resume. "To learn," Sophie said simply. "I've always been curious about what it's like to work for someone who built everything with their own hands." That line hit him. She got the job. Weeks turned into months. Sophie worked hard. She never complained, never bragged, never asked for anything beyond her pay. She ate lunch with the staff, stayed late when needed, and even covered for others when they were sick. Ethan watched her, not as her boss, but as a man trying to understand a mystery. She wasn't driven by money. She seemed content with the little she had. One evening, after a long meeting, Ethan offered to drop her home. She hesitated but agreed. The drive was quiet at first, but soon they talked about books, childhood dreams, and life lessons. Ethan found himself laughing for the first time in months. By the end of that week, he had asked her out. At first, Sophie refused. "It's not right. You're my boss," she said with a smile. But Ethan was persistent, in the most respectful way. "Then consider it a dinner between two people who enjoy good conversation," he said. That night, their first dinner felt effortless. She didn't ask about his cars, his mansion, or his millions. She asked about his childhood, about his mother who raised him alone, about what made him start his company. No woman had ever done that. Ethan knew she was different. After 3 months of dating, everyone around Ethan noticed something strange. The man who used to avoid relationships was suddenly soft, happier. But Ethan's old scars still whispered doubts. His ex-fiancée had left him 2 years ago after discovering another man with a bigger company. Since then, Ethan made a promise to himself: never fall for words, test actions. So one morning, Marcus, his assistant, walked in and found Ethan staring at a blank check. Planning a new charity donation? Marcus joked. Ethan smiled faintly. Something like that? Or maybe I'm about to make the biggest mistake of my life. He placed the check in an envelope and waited for the right moment. A week later, Ethan invited Sophie to his office. When she walked in, he looked distant, almost businesslike. "Sophie," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about us. About the future." She smiled, but something in his tone made her uneasy. He slid the envelope across the table. "Inside that is a blank check," he said slowly. "You can write any amount you want. Anything." Sophie frowned, confused. "Why would I do that?" "Because," Ethan said quietly, "I need to know what matters to you more, me or what I have." There was silence, the kind that stretched between them like a wall. Sophie looked down at the envelope, then back at him. "Ethan," she said softly, "if you're testing me, then I feel sorry for you. Because you should already know me better than that." She opened the check. It was real. Limitless. For a long moment she stared at it. Then she picked up a pen and wrote something quickly. Ethan's heart pounded. He didn't even want to look. She pushed it back toward him and stood up. When Ethan glanced down, his breath caught. She had written, $1. Below it, she had added a note. Because I don't need your money, I just need your respect. And with that, she walked out of his office. Ethan sat frozen. No woman had ever done that before. He'd met women who cried, shouted, even begged. But not one who walked away with just $1 and her pride intact. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying her words. Respect. Not money. For the first time, Ethan realized he might have tested the wrong person and failed his own test. The next morning, Sophie didn't show up for work. By noon, Ethan called her phone, no answer. He sent a message, nothing. By evening, he drove to her apartment, only to find it empty. The landlord said she had packed up and left earlier that morning. Ethan felt like the air had been knocked out of him. He sat in his car for hours, the check still in his hand. For a man who had everything, he had never felt so poor. That night, Ethan drove to his mother's old house, the place he always went when he needed to think. He looked at the check again and whispered to himself, maybe money really can't buy what matters most. He folded the check and placed it in his pocket. 2 weeks later, Ethan attended a charity event hosted by one of his business partners. It was the kind of high-profile gathering he usually avoided, but something told him to go. Halfway through the evening, he heard a familiar laugh behind him. When he turned, he froze. It was Sophie. She was standing beside an older man in a sharp gray suit. The man smiled at Ethan and extended a hand. Mr. Cole, I've heard quite a lot about you, he said. I'm Richard Miller, Sophie's father. Ethan blinked. Her father? The name hit him like thunder. Richard Miller, the real estate billionaire. Sophie smiled calmly. Surprised? Ethan stammered. I didn't know you were. A Miller, she finished. Yeah. I didn't tell you. I wanted to know if someone could ever love me without knowing that name. There was the truth he never saw coming. The billionaire who tested his girlfriend had just been outplayed by the woman who tested him first. As the night went on, Ethan found himself speechless. Sophie had fooled him, not out of malice, but out of the same fear he had. She wanted to know if love could exist without wealth. And she had proven it, even before he did. The man who used to measure trust in dollars was now humbled by a woman who measured love in character. And as the music played and guests mingled, Ethan made a decision that would change everything. He would win her back, this time with truth, not tests. Ethan stood there, surrounded by laughter and champagne, but all he could hear was his own heartbeat. He had been known for making business decisions worth billions, yet at that moment, he couldn't even form a sentence. The woman he had fallen for, the one he thought was a humble secretary, was actually the daughter of one of America's wealthiest men. And somehow, it made him admire her even more. If you are new to our stories, subscribe to join the Whisper House family. When Sophie and her father walked away to greet other guests, Ethan excused himself to the balcony. The night breeze hit his face, cold and sharp. He could still feel the sting of embarrassment in his chest. He had tested her, a woman who never asked for a thing, a woman who already had everything and still chose to live simply. He tested her with money. And she passed that test better than he ever could have imagined. Behind him, a voice spoke gently. You look like a man who just realized he's not as smart as he thought. It was Richard Miller. Ethan chuckled dryly, rubbing the back of his neck. Something like that, sir? Richard joined him on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. You know, Sophie told me about you. She said you were different. I can see why. I tested her, Ethan admitted, his voice low. I gave her a blank check. Wanted to know if she was with me for my money. Richard smiled faintly. And she wrote $1, didn't she? Ethan's head snapped up. She told you? Of course. She tells me everything, Richard said with a laugh. She told me you looked like a guilty puppy afterward. Ethan sighed. She should hate me. Richard shook his head. No. She understands you, maybe better than you understand yourself. You've both been living behind walls built by wealth, hers through privilege, yours through distrust. You are both trying to see what's real. Ethan stared at him. "You're not angry?" Richard smiled. "Son, if more men tested women like that, and if more women responded the way Sophie did, this world would have a lot fewer divorces." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "If you really love her, go get her. But this time, no more tests." The next morning, Ethan showed up at Sophie's family estate, a sprawling mansion that made even his look modest. The gates opened, and he drove down the long driveway with a heart full of anxiety and hope. When he arrived, Sophie was sitting by the garden fountain, dressed casually, reading a book. She didn't look surprised to see him. Maybe she expected him to come. He approached slowly. "Mind if I sit?" She closed her book, studying him quietly. "You already did," she said with a faint smirk. Ethan smiled, but his tone was serious. "You knew I didn't know about your background, didn't you?" Sophie nodded. "Yes. I wanted to see if someone could ever see me, not my last name, not my father's money." He took a deep breath. "And I wanted to see if someone could love me without wanting mine. Seems we both had the same fear." For a long moment, they said nothing. The sound of the fountain filled the silence between them. Then Ethan said softly, "I was wrong to test you, Sophie. You showed me what real worth looks like." I kept it. It reminded me of the kind of woman I'd be a fool to lose. Her expression softened. "You hurt me, Ethan. I understand why you did it. We live in a world where everyone has a price. Maybe we both just wanted to find someone who didn't." He reached into his jacket and handed her the folded check. "I think this belongs to you." Sophie looked down at the paper, still showing her neat handwriting, $1. She smiled sadly. "You really kept it?" "I did," he said. "Because that dollar was worth more than every deal I've ever made." They walked through the garden, the air warm with late summer sunlight. Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. "You know what's crazy? I thought I was teaching you something about honesty. But you're the one who taught me." Sophie tilted her head. "What did I teach you?" "That love isn't measured by what someone can give you, it's measured by what they won't take from you." She stopped walking. "That's a good line. You should put that in one of your business books." He laughed. "Maybe I'll save it for our story." Weeks passed. Ethan and Sophie began seeing each other again. This time, no secrets, no pretending. He took her to meet his mother's memorial garden, a place sacred to him. And she took him into her world, to charity events, art galleries, and even her father's old properties that she helped renovate into housing for the homeless. It amazed Ethan. Despite her wealth, Sophie lived with purpose. She didn't flaunt her fortune, she used it. He realized something he hadn't before. Humility doesn't come from being poor, it comes from knowing your worth and not needing to prove it. Months later, on a quiet evening, Ethan invited Sophie to his lakeside home. The place glowed with soft lights and candles. When she walked in, she found him standing by the water, holding something behind his back. Sophie smiled suspiciously. "You're up to something." Ethan took a deep breath. "You're right. I am." He pulled out an envelope, the same one he used for the blank check. Her eyes widened. "Not again," she teased. He grinned. "Relax. No more tests. Just full circle." He handed it to her. She opened it, and inside was the same check, still showing $1, but now laminated, framed, and beneath it were the words, "The day I realized money means nothing without love." Sophie looked up at him, her eyes glossy. "You're impossible, you know that?" Ethan smiled nervously, then dropped to one knee. "Sophie Miller," he said, voice trembling slightly, "you taught me what real wealth is. It's not the company I built, the houses I own, or the zeros in my account. It's you. You're the only investment I never want to lose. Will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she laughed softly. "Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring on her finger, and as they embraced, the lake reflected the lights above them, two worlds that had finally met in the middle. Their engagement made headlines across America. Two billionaires in love. But to them, the story wasn't about money. They started a foundation together, the $1 Promise. Its mission was simple, to teach people that value isn't always about wealth, but integrity. They funded small business owners, students, and couples struggling to build something real in a world obsessed with material things. And every time someone asked Ethan about the story behind the name, he'd smile and say, "It started with a woman who could have had anything, but chose $1 instead." At the end of this story, here's what you see. Love built on honesty will outlast any wealth built on greed. Ethan tested Sophie's heart and almost lost her. Sophie tested Ethan's intentions and found his truth. Both learned that you can't measure love by luxury, only by loyalty. Because real love doesn't need to prove its worth. It just needs to show up, stay true, and never put a price tag on the heart. And somewhere in their home, framed above their wedding photo, still hangs that same check with $1.00 written neatly in blue ink, the symbol of a test that turned into a love story the internet will never forget. Please subscribe and turn on the bell so that you will get notified when a new story drops tomorrow.